So, welcome everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. Just wave if you can hear me. Okay, good. Welcome to the Krame Center for Mindful Living, and welcome to our first book club featuring Dear Edward by author Ann Napolitano. So just a bit about us before we get started. We're a not-for-profit 501c3, and we provide programs to help people reduce their stress, become more resilient, and hopefully live better lives. So our programs are all rooted in, we call it our three pillars. They're rooted in mindfulness, positive psychology, and self-compassion. So please visit our website, thecramecenter.org, and follow us on social media for updates. We just finished a really interesting 8-week series that couldn't have been more timely. We had experts from all over the country talking about everything from hope to mindfulness, transcendence, meaning and purpose, uncertainty and possibility, and even some neuroscience. So please follow us on social media, see what we're up to. So I'm Catherine, and I'll be your host this evening along with Sarah.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm so happy to be with all of you this evening, and I'm really looking forward to a very meaningful conversation.
Thanks, Sarah. So Sarah and I both love the book, and we couldn't think of a better book to launch our book club than Dear Edward. So beautifully written. The character development was just spectacular, inspiring hope and new possibility. And that's something I think we can all agree on that we need right now, right? This idea of, it was very poignant too. It was just wonderful. So we're thrilled to be joined by the author herself, Ann Napolitano. She's the author of the novels A Good Hard Look and Within Arm's Reach. And Ann is also the associate editor of One Story Literary Magazine. She received her MFA from NYU. She's taught fiction writing for Brooklyn College, New York University School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and for Gotham Writers Workshop, and also up for some awards. So we're so pleased that you're here, Ann. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I've heard wonderful things about your work for years, so it's really nice to be here.
Thank you. So before we begin, I just want to go over how the evening is going to unfold and just talk also about a couple of technical details that will help you, navigate the communication aspect of this. So we're going to begin with a short meditation. For those of you who may be new to meditation, no worries. Just do your best. Just do your best to follow along. And the one thing I want to say, and I say this to all my students, because one of the first things someone who is new to meditating says, oh my God, I'll never be good at meditating because I can't stop the thoughts. So just here's a novel thought. It's not about stopping the thoughts. It's just about how we meet them. So can we encounter a thought and allow it to rise and fall, just like our breath rises and falls. And it will do so more easily if we don't get hooked into it and swept away by it. So that's my only little tidbit of advice for anyone who's relatively new to meditating, to kind of think about that. And there's no right or wrong. So just have fun with it if you're new to meditating. After the meditation, it'll be relatively short. It's not going to be, super long. Then Ann has been gracious enough to offer to read an excerpt from her book, and she'll talk a little bit about that. And then following the reading and her little discussion about the book and her thoughts about what prompted her to write it and so forth, then we're going to open it up and we're going to have a discussion. We'll have a Q&A, and we're going to invite you all to participate in a meaningful way. So you have two options. If you would like to speak, there is a digital hand raise, and I'm going to walk you all through it right now. So take a moment to move your mouse along the bottom of your screen until you see where it says participants, and you'll see a couple of little heads and shoulders, and you'll click on that box. And at the bottom of that box, it should say raise hand. So when you want to raise your hand, you click that And then we'll call on you, and we'll try to do it in an orderly fashion, one at a time, whoever, in the order that you raise your hand. Forgive us if we take you out of order, if we don't quite get that right. But then you'll have an opportunity to speak with Ann and share thoughts. And then also another opportunity, if you're not feeling like actually speaking, you can also ask a question in the chat. So now if you move your mouse over to where it says chat and you click on that, that opens up the chat box. So now you have two boxes open. One is where you see all the names and you can raise your hand. And the other one, you can type in a question. So it's totally your choice. And I would recommend maybe leaving that open for the duration of our session tonight, because then you can see what other people are writing in the chat box. And you can also communicate back and forth with others who are making comments. So it's kind of a fun way to be engaged while being separate. So this virtual world is a whole new ballgame. So, and then after we have our questions and answers and discussion, then we'll have a very short wrap up that Sarah will lead, just a just a couple of minute wrap up. So without any further ado, I am going to invite you we're going to move into our meditation. So I'm going to invite you to find a comfortable posture that is supportive of wakeful alertness. Perhaps moving your back away from the back of the chair just a little bit, feeling both your feet on the floor, so uncrossing any legs, and then inviting a little bit of space in the spine. So lengthening the spine just a little bit, moving the crown of the head towards the ceiling. And then just placing your hands in your lap or on your thighs. And then if it's comfortable, I'm also going to invite you to close your eyes. And if closing your eyes is not that comfortable, then just softening the gaze. All right? So now just taking a nice settling breath and allowing yourself a sense of arriving in this space, arriving in the chair that you're sitting on or couch, whatever it might be. And then inviting a sense of arrival into your own body. And at the same time, inviting a sense of arrival into this moment. So just really giving yourself permission to drop in to the body, to drop into this moment, to be here fully present. And if it is helpful, using contact points is a wonderful gateway into the body and into the present moment. So bringing an awareness to the soles of the feet, the sits bones in the chair, the hands in your lap or on your thighs. And just feeling into those tactile sensations, feeling the physical as a means of really inhabiting the body. And then just tuning in and feeling the support that our bodies offer us. The support from the chair, the support from the floor, and even the earth below. So just tuning in and noticing any areas of tension, perhaps inviting a softening in these areas. And then as you're ready, tuning into the breath, allowing the breath to be the anchor into the body. And just following the rhythm of your own breath cycle. And maybe noticing how the breath is coming in and out of the body. Feeling the belly rise and fall. Or maybe feeling the expansion of the chest with each inhalation and then the deflation of the lungs on the exhalation. Seeing if it's possible to follow each breath all the way to the end. And then maybe even being able to notice how naturally one breath turns into the next. Perhaps taking a moment to notice, how is the breath now? Maybe it's a little different than when I first started. Maybe not. But simply paying attention to the breath and noticing what can be known. And now I'm going to invite you to take a moment to honor the idea of hope and possibility in the wake of uncertainty. Perhaps even recognizing that they are two sides of the same coin. When we lean into hope and possibility, we may also find that we can even begin to scan our experience for moments to savor. And these moments can show up at the door of our own breath. So the micro moment of an in-breath savored can be one such moment. Filling our lungs with gratitude for each life-sustaining breath. And then the gentle release of an exhale can be another such moment. So using the breath in our daily life to notice these moments. And perhaps taking a moment now to bring to mind something recent that you were able to savor. Maybe it's something as simple as how the warmth of your morning coffee cup felt cradled in your hands, with the delicious aroma filling your nostrils. These small moments of appreciation really can remind us of all the possibilities that are here right before us if we just look for them. And now perhaps even setting the intention to be open to the possibilities that are right before us right now. Including this precious gathering. And now perhaps taking another breath or two. Beginning to bring your awareness back to the group and to what we're about to experience. And if your eyes were closed, then just gently allowing them to flutter open. And if your body requires a little bit of movement, wiggling fingers and toes. And then in your own time, bringing full awareness to what is about to unfold. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Ann. And Ann, I'm going to invite you to share with us.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start by reading a short section from Dear Edward, and then it's only like 3.5 minutes, so don't worry. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to write the book, and then I am happy to answer any questions that there are. So it's not giving anything away to say that this book is about a plane crash. You find out right away if you haven't read it. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the second chapter of the book. So in the first chapter of the book, if you haven't read it, Edward, this little boy, 12-year-old boy named Edward, and his family board a flight in Newark, New Jersey. And the flight is bound for Los Angeles to LAX. And you get to know a few other passengers that are on the plane too while they're boarding. And then at the end of chapter 1, the plane takes off. And then the beginning of chapter 2 is later that same day, but the plane has crashed. So this is later in the afternoon on June 12th, 2013. The National Transportation Safety Board's GO team is at the site 7 hours after the accident, the length of time it takes for them to fly from DC to Denver, and then drive rental cars to the small town in the flatlands of northern Colorado. Because of the long summer daylight, it's not yet dark when they arrive. Their real work will take place at sunrise the following day. They are here now to get a sense of the scene, to simply begin. The town's mayor is there to greet the NTSB lead investigator. They posed for a photograph for the media. Except for the handshake, the mayor, who is also a bookkeeper, because this town can't afford full-time employees, tucks his hands in his pockets to hide the fact that they're trembling. The police have cordoned off the area. The NTSB team, wearing protective orange suits and face masks, climbs over and around the wreckage. The land is level in every direction, the surface burned, charred, a piece of toast blackened under a broiler. The fire is out, but the air is charged with heat. The plane sluiced through a cluster of trees and dug itself into the earth. The good news, the members of the team tell one another, is that it wasn't in a residential area. No humans on the ground were hurt. They find 2 mangled cows and a dead bird among the chairs, luggage, metal, and limbs. Families of the victims arrive in Denver by plane and car over the 24 hours following the event. The downtown Marriott has several floors reserved for them. At 5 p.m. on June 13th, the NTSB spokesman, a man with acne-scarred skin and a gentle demeanor, gives an update to the families and media in the hotel banquet hall. Family members perch on folding chairs. They lean forward as if the skin on their shoulders can hear. They bow their heads as if their hair follicles might pick up what no other part of their body can. Pores are open, fingers spread. They listen fiercely, hoping that a better, less crushing truth exists beneath the facts being delivered. There is a cluster of elaborate flower arrangements in the back corner of the room, which no one looks at. Red and pink peonies in giant vases, a cascade of white lilies. Smell.
Ann. Did we lose Ann?
It looks like we may have for a moment.
Oh, and
Me?
we lost you a little bit. You froze.
Oh.
So maybe you want to just read the last sentence or so.
Sorry, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
That's weird. Sorry about that.
Okay. Technology.
Yeah, sure. They're left over from a wedding held in the room the night before. This smell will keep several family members out of flower shops for the rest of their lives. The press stands apart at the briefing. They avoid eye contact with the relatives during interviews. They develop their own tics. One man scratches his arms as if he's been attacked by poison ivy. An on-air reporter fixes and refixes her hair. They disseminate the updates in live television interviews and through emailed AP reports. They focus on the quote-unquote known passengers, a plastics baron famous for building an empire and automating thousands of employees out of work, a Wall Street wunderkind worth an estimated $104 million, a United States Army officer, 3 college professors, a civil rights activist, and a former writer for Law and Order. They pour facts into hungry mouths. This news story has captivated the world. Every corner of the internet has weighed in. A reporter holds up a copy of the New York Times to a camera to show the huge block headline, the kind normally reserved for presidential elections and moonwalks. It reads, 191 died in plane crash, 1 survivor. The relatives have only one question when the press briefing comes to a close. They all lean toward it like a window in a dark room. How is the boy? That's how the second chapter starts, and Edward's story after the crash. So I'll just tell you how I came to write the book, because generally that sort of answers a bunch of people's questions, understandably. And it started because I became obsessed with a real plane crash that was in the news. There was a crash in 2010. It was a flight from South Africa bound for London, and it crashed in Libya. And it was mostly Dutch passengers on board that were on their way home from vacation in South Africa. And when it crashed, there was only 1 survivor. It was a 9-year-old Dutch boy. And they found him about a half mile away from the rest of the wreckage. And he was still buckled into his airplane seat. And he had a punctured lung and a broken leg, but he was otherwise completely fine. And everyone else on board, including his parents and his brother, had died immediately. And it was huge news at the time. Almost nobody remembers it now, I think, because so many terrible things happen. But it was a 24/7 news stations. It was the cover of the New York Times. It was a major international event. And I was obsessed with it almost immediately. And there are two things really that drew me to it, I think. And the first was probably the smaller one, but in 2010, social media had kind of reached the level where it's recognizable as what we know it as today for the first time. So in 2010, for the first time, everyone you knew was on Facebook. That was not the case before that. And so when this huge international event happened, there were young girls about the same age as the little Dutch boy that were creating Facebook pages for him about how cute he was and how sad they were for him. And there were airplane aficionados who were speculating about why the plane might have crashed. We never found out actually why that plane crashed, because it crashed in Libya and they have no transparency, or they're not required to release that kind of information. There were leaks from inside, information leaks online from inside the hospital where the boy was staying. It was reported online that the president of Libya had called him in the hospital to see how he was, which I thought was amazing and crazy. And so for the first time, it was looking at a massive news event, but not just through the gatekeepers of journalists. I had like a 360-degree view of the event where everybody who wanted to could have a voice in it. And that really fascinated me. And the way this boy became famous immediately with like 9-year-old girls, spanning out to, men who were tracking the story for aeronautical reasons was really interesting to me. And then the second thing was that, obviously it's such a striking story. And there was one photo that accompanied nearly every news article about the crash. And it was of the little boy, the little Dutch boy in his hospital bed. I found out later that this photo, which is still like one of the top 2 hits if you Google this crash now, was not authorized, which makes sense because it's of the little boy asleep in his hospital bed. So like, who would release that? But in any case, it became the most printed photo of him. And he was so beautiful and so small and looked so broken. And I have two boys. And in 2010, they were 1 and 3. And so I would look at the picture of the little boy and just think, you know, how is he going to be able to climb out of his hospital bed? And how is he going to be able to walk out of that hospital without his mom and his dad and his brother? Like, how is that actually possible? Like, how can we expect someone that young to be able to muster whatever you need to muster in order to not only get over something of this massive impact, but like somehow create a new life? Like, that seems almost an impossible amount to ask of someone that small. And so in the real story, the Dutch boy's aunt and uncle came and adopted him, and they brought him back to Holland. And they did an amazing job of protecting his privacy from like the minute that they took him in. They like blacked out the windows of their station wagon so nobody could take pictures. There was never another interview, nothing. So basically that meant that I couldn't know if that little boy was able to become okay. And I could tell by the way that this obsession felt that it was something that I was going to have to write my way into understanding. And basically, I felt like I needed to write a set of fictional circumstances to see if it was possible for a young human to go through something like that and find their way to making a new life and being in any way okay. And I really didn't know if it was possible. I had to figure it out. And so it took the next 8 years to write it because I'm very slow. And that was, you know, that's what led me into the book. Prior to this, I had no, you know, aeronautical knowledge or interest, or I had never tracked plane crashes. None of this was something that I would have thought that I would have walked into, but that was how it came to be. And I'm happy to. Any questions?
I was just going to say, your passion just was so ingrained in the book that I thought for sure, I had read that it was based on a plane crash, and I actually Googled after I read the book, the flight number, looking, looking to see, because I thought that I wanted to find out more. And I wondered to myself, oh, did you interview the surviving members of, the families? Because it was just so, the characters were just so well developed and real. So you could really feel the passion that you felt for writing that book.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't have wanted to interview. I never reached out to them, and I would rather that they never knew that I wrote a book that was inspired by it. I mean, I from the first, as soon as my obsession sort of gelled into writing a fictional version, I wouldn't even have wanted to know anything, because I just wanted to create it, in my own understanding, in my own head. And I wouldn't want anything of that boy or his experience, in the book to protect him.
And that makes total sense. It just felt so real to the reader, to me as the reader. I can only speak for myself, that it was like, oh my God, and I was Googling, is this like, what was the real story here? And how much of it was, but it you just developed it so beautifully that it felt so real. The passion was coming through, jumping off the pages in how you penned it. But now I do want to see if anyone else has any questions for you about anything, whether it's the process of writing or, any questions at all. So please feel free now to either write in the chat or raise your hands.
Patricia.
Yes, Pat, you could unmute yourself, and then we'll lower your hand here. Yep. Pat, we don't hear you. Now we do.
Modern technology. I've got 42 screens open, One of the things that hit me, in reading was your descriptors. Just even in the passage that you spoke about, for me, were incredibly visceral. You know, like the one, you know, talked about the people like they lean towards like the window in the room, you know, or the skin on their shoulders, or toast under a broiler. I mean, they were so vivid. Can you speak to your process of, you know, when you're writing? Is that just what comes out?
Yes, more or less. I guess what I can say in response to that for the process is that I love writing what I call sort of self-deprecatingly pretty sentences. Like that's my happy place, and that's what I love to do. And so sentences like that, like they're usually uglier when they first come out. Like I will have like 3 metaphors in a sentence, and then I cut it down to 1. Sometimes, you know, it comes out perfectly the first time. The writing like that, making it sort of lyrical, is something that comes fairly naturally to me. What I have to work at, and so what I did for this book, but that I haven't done for any of my other books, was that for the first year, I didn't let myself write any pretty sentences. This was a challenge for my husband that was very annoying, but very smart, where he suggested, because I had really struggled with the book before this, because I guess I'm what is called an intuitive writer, or I always had been. Which means sort of like I would start writing a scene and someone would enter the room and say something that I wasn't expecting them to say, and then something else would happen because of that. And that's a very exciting way to write, because it's like being a reader. It's an act of discovery the whole time. There's a great E.L. Doctorow quote about writing novels, that writing a novel is like driving home on a foggy night. You can only see as far as the end of the headlight's beam, but that's enough to get you home. You see a little bit and then a little bit and a little bit, but you get to your driveway. And that was how I wrote up until this book, but I really struggled with the book before it. And my headlight beams were like, I was like running into trees as opposed to like going around the trees. And so my husband had suggested that whatever my next book was, that I spend the first year not writing pretty sentences and not like sort of being intuitive, but taking notes and doing research and thinking about it. And also reading outside of my normal genres. And so I did that. And because what I found is when I'm writing the pretty sentences, I cannot think, like the cerebral part of my brain doesn't work. So I did this sort of cerebral planning for a lot of what was going to happen in that first year. And then when I was allowed to start writing pretty sentences, it came out a lot more cleanly because of the preparation.
Right.
Can I ask a question about that? When you said the cerebral planning, did that include the character development? Because I was curious, and actually Sarah and I talked about this, like how did you made them come alive, and they were so detailed, and was that part of the cerebral planning and then you did the pretty sentencing after, or how did that work? Which came first?
Well, to some extent, so the year of thinking was the most helpful for everything that happened on the plane. Not everything that happened, but actually who I was going to follow on the plane.
Right.
Because once I realized, and almost as soon as I had the idea to write it, I knew I was going to write about the flight and about Edward's life afterwards, and I knew that they were going to sit side by side. So knowing that I got to write half of the book that took place on a plane was actually really exciting, because for me as a writer, because everyone flies, like every single kind of person. So usually if you're writing, a domestic drama taking place in a house in a cul-de-sac, demographically I'm limited to the people in that house, and their surrounding friends. But on a plane, I was like, well, I want to choose people that are as different from each other as possible. And I want to explore different ages, different socioeconomic, different races, everything. And so I sort of thought about who I wanted to follow. And then I did research, I read a book for almost every person who I follow during that year. Like for Crispin Cox, the octogenarian billionaire, I read Jack Welch, the guy who ran GE for 30 years. I read his autobiography, which is very funny. It's not supposed to be funny, but it's very funny. And, it's called Straight from the Gut. And then like for Benjamin Stillman, The Soldier, I read War by Sebastian Junger, the guy who wrote The Perfect Storm. Is a wonderful nonfiction book. And then I have a friend who's in the military that I spoke to. David Foster Wallace wrote a book about math that I read for the dad, who's a pure mathematician. And I have a friend who's a pure mathematician. When I was reading outside of my sort of normal zone of like literary fiction during that year, I read a lot of graphic novels, and I read the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. And Gaiman's, like there are characters in that book that are like dream and death. So he like disregards sort of all sorts of boundaries of, time, distance, everything. And so when I was reading that, I was like, why can't I have a character who like believes that she's been living for many lives? And so I came up with Florida on the plane because of reading Neil Gaiman. So that's where the sort of planning came in. It was harder for me. I didn't get as much traction with what happens on the ground during that year, because that really was like an emotional, like I knew he was going to be adopted by his aunt and uncle, and I knew there was a girl his age who lived next door and that he was going to sleep on her floor. And I didn't know why, but I just knew that. But beyond that, I had to like feel through it for Edward. So that I needed my pretty sentences for. So the plane sections, actually, when I started writing them, because they're on a plane and there's a beginning, middle, and an end, and they're trapped in a space the size of a steel bus. There's only so many things that could happen. So that was actually quite easy for me, relatively speaking. And then Edward's was where I wrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote, trying to get like the emotional microfibers right for his, I don't like recovery, but his journey forward.
Yeah, well, you could certainly appreciate the potpourri of characters. And it's unbelievable how much went into that. Like, one would never think that you would read an entire book just to create that character, to be able to do it so authentically, I guess. So I see we have a couple of hands raised. I know that Kaylin had her hand raised before. So we'll start with Kaylin, and then we'll do Kendall and Sue. So Kaylin, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So for me, what really struck me, as I think I was speaking about it with Catherine, that the letters were so poignant. And what really struck me, Anne, when you were telling your story about what inspired you to write this, that, you didn't want to look into what happened to the boy after. You wanted to make that story for yourself, and you were wondering how this kid could possibly be okay, and after going through something like that. So I'm curious if you always knew that you were going to make letters be his form of his journey towards being more okay than he was when he immediately following this tragedy, or if that was something that kind of came about through the writing process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yes, it came through the writing process. Really, because I really didn't know what I was gonna, like, I sort of had to inhabit Edward from like this place of empathy that I had for the little Dutch boy, and kind of thinking, oh my God, like, what does that feel like? I kind of had to go into that headspace in the Edward chapters and just like try and take step after step with him to see what he was able to do and like what the people around him said. And the letters showed up in a fairly early draft. So they've been there for most of the time, but I didn't know that they were going to be there. He found them initially like in the attic, and then eventually he finds them in the garage. But I was always looking for places in the book where what was happening in the sky could touch what was happening on the ground. And when he opened the bag, I didn't really know what was going to be in there. And so that was like an active discovery thing, but that was so early on that it became a sort of bedrock of the book. And when I sold the book to my editor, we talked about maybe moving the letters, like that discovery, earlier in the book, because obviously the title is based on it, etc. But he really was like, if he'd found that duffel bag in the first year, I think he just would like lay down on it. Like there was no way that he would have been able to grapple with, you know, opening a letter, much less like the contents inside. He really had to be further along. So yeah, I mean, that, yes, I guess I just made it up.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. We had, I think, Kendall and Sue. So Kendall, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi. I was wondering, because you said you started, like, you really got into it, and like, was it, you said 2010 after the plane crash, and it took you, you know, practically a decade to write it. And I was wondering, you know, as a writer, how many times, if any, did you put the book away thinking like, I can't finish this, this is too much, this is too hard? Did you have those moments? And if you did, what pulled you out, or what inspired you to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had those moments. And I mean, the whole time I wrote this book, I didn't actually think I would be able to sell it, because I had written 2 novels before this. And they had both been well reviewed, but they hadn't sold very many copies. And so I was what is known as a mid-list writer, which is mid-career and, you know, not a good sales track. So I knew I was not an attractive, I don't know, prospect for publishers. I knew I had an amazing agent, so I knew that, you know, if anyone could sell it, it would be her. But essentially, I wrote this book for 8 years thinking there was a really strong chance nobody would read it. So I really was writing it because I felt like I had to write this story, and because I have to write in order to like feel mentally whole and healthy and emotionally whole and healthy. Like I discovered in my 20s basically that if I didn't write, I got depressed. And if I write, I'm not depressed. So it's like, it just is part of who I am. And it's part of like, it's a puzzle piece that is absolutely required in me to feel good. And so there were definitely periods though, like there's a period for me, like the book before this took 7 years, this book took 8 years. So I just am slow. So there's a period in the middle where I'm like 4 years in and it's a hot mess and I cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know there's years left. I can just tell. And I'm like, I should get a job that like pays real money and help my family. And what am I doing? This is like a terrible decision, so selfish. And I get all wrapped up in this like Catholic guilt thing bubble. And my solution for that, which I still use in all these various points, for when I'm feeling despair in that position, or if my life is really busy and I don't have enough time to write, whether I'm teaching or something like that, or kid issues or pandemic, then I make a deal with myself where I have to write for 5 minutes a day, at least 5 minutes a day. And when I've written for 5 minutes, then I put an X on my calendar. And my only job is to see how many X's in a row I can string together. And that's how I've gotten through the despair, basically, because I can do 5 minutes a day. You can always do 5 minutes. And usually, obviously, I would do more than 5 minutes. And at some point after like 3 weeks of 5 minutes a day, either something would happen in the book that would like really ignite my excitement again, or whatever was going on in my life would clear up. I mean, it kind of is like meditation in the sense that like if you show up and clear that space for yourself, sometimes it's terrible and sometimes it's lovely, but you just have to keep doing it as a practice. So I guess I address it as a practice more than anything else to get through those times.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Oh, well, good. And it's a very usable skill, because I mean, for whatever it is, you know, that one is trying to move forward on, we always have 5 minutes. We can talk ourselves out of a half hour, but we can't really talk ourselves out of 5 minutes.
Yeah, I can do 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I love the analogy between the writing and the meditation because it's so true. It's a practice.
Yeah.
Clearing the space. So yeah. So I think Sue wanted to ask you a question, and then we'll have Murillo. So Sue, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes. Hi. So I don't know if it's as much a question as something that I loved about your book and would like to share, is that throughout the pandemic, and I'm sure like everybody, I've had my ups and downs. And one of the things I decided to do very early on is give a gift every day. And I don't know if I've made every day, but in the past 10 weeks, I've done almost every single day. And in the middle of it, I read your book, I read your Edward, and I was like, wow, this is really poignant, because this is how he heals or starts to heal, is by reading the letters and starting to give. And I just love that. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh, that is lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Murillo?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ann, for being here. And I have to say, Shay was my favorite character of the book. I found myself laughing out loud, literally, some of her quips and, and quick wit. And she balanced, of course, she balanced Edward very well. So can you talk a little, you mentioned already that you just knew that he was going to sleep at someone's floor, at a girl's floor, but how did Shay came about, and how did she develop throughout?
Yeah, I love her too. Well, so the starting place really was that I knew that there was going to be this girl his age who lived next door, and that he was going to sleep on her floor, and I didn't know anything else, and I was worried about it because I was like, I just can't see how that is going to make sense or feel right or anything. And so what happened was, so like I said, I was really in Edward. So like we went home from the hospital with his aunt and uncle, and then like on the second morning or whatever, when Shay and her mother show up on the doorstep, it was like I saw her like peek out from behind her mother, and then she just sort of blew into the room and blew into the scene with this like force of nature kind of personality. And I was like, oh, I'm getting it. Like, this is why, this is how he's going to sleep on her floor. So she sort of arrived for me. I didn't have she wasn't preconceived, but I think it was just that her energy and her no bullshit attitude and her forthrightness with Edward was like a completely necessary note in the book. Like, it would have been so, he's so submerged in his grief, and all the grown-ups are walking on eggshells around him. And she's a kid and she doesn't care, and she's not going to walk on eggshells around him. And she's a weirdo. And now, because of what's happened to him, he's a weirdo too. So they kind of need each other. They give each other something. And then I realized sort of as I was going into it that I really think that he went and slept on her floor. She was the only kid he'd come in contact with, and he misses his brother so much, so painfully. And they had been in bunk beds their entire life. And I think in those first days, like, he needed physically to be by another kid, and he needed to sleep near another kid in order to like just not explode into a million pieces. And so she provided him with that too. And then like their friendship developed, as the book went on, and that was very fun for me to write into and see what she would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So do we have anyone else's hands raised? Let's take a look here. No? Okay.
I can ask another question.
Go ahead. Feel free. Absolutely.
I found it interesting too how you got to stuck Harry Potter in there. Was that kind of was a preemptive decision of how people would compare Edward, just and you kind of just preemptively decided to compare yourself to, or did that just come about again in your process?
That would suggest I was way smarter about everything than I was. No, it didn't even occur to me until she said it, and then I was like, oh my God, it is like Harry Potter. So it was more like her being more clever on her side. And Harry Potter, I mean, as in very many households, has had a huge role in my house. I read is it 7 books? I read all 7 books out loud to my boys. And it took 9 months after school every day. And I've been reading to them since they were born, but the Harry Potter books were this whole separate experience where we would come home from school, and their afternoons where they would just beg me to keep reading until I'd been reading for 2 hours out loud. And like in those moments, like as a writer and a book nerd, I was like, this is why I had children. Like, this is this is amazing. Like where they were enjoying it as much as I was like really magical. So, there's such a living nature to those stories that, it's the myth for young people. So it made sense to me that it was what Shay reached for and how she watched something that she would use to make sense of the world. And it was fun to do. There was a lot more, not a lot more, but there was more Harry Potter reference in it. And my husband was like, you need to pull that back. Like there's still too much at one point.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks. So Vanessa has a question. Vanessa, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for joining the book club and coming. I just have to say, I just loved the book so much. I loved the story. It was really phenomenal from the first minute, like all the way to the end. It was, I just felt like every chapter was its own unfolding. So I just love the way that you laid everything out. I hate to go back to the characters because I know that we already touched upon it, but I just have a few questions that I'm trying to understand from like where you were coming from and my interpretation of the story. The development of the characters was so incredible, so incredible. And I just thought it was amazing because they were all so diverse and at different stages of their lives and different experiences. And you felt that you really understood where every character was coming from that was on that plane. And then I even felt like I really understood like the principal, the aunt, the uncle, like every person. I felt like the tie with the psychologist, like how hard he was trying. And the two most like underdeveloped characters for me, and this is what I'm curious about for you, from your perspective, I still at the end was like wondering, and I wasn't sure if this was intentional. Edward for me was the least developed in a way. Like I knew the least about him going into the crash. It was really hard, and Marilla touched on, oh, Shay, she's so powerful, like you know exactly where she's coming from, you're right, she's like a no filter type of girl. And Edward is always like, I was always struggling to, and I felt his plight and what he was going through, but I was always trying to understand like what really, you know, who made him who he was, and was he not that person yet? And like that's what it was like at the end of the story. So that's my first question as it relates to Edward. And then I also would love to know more about the fortune teller tarot reader.
Sure. Okay, so that's a very good question. It's tricky with Edward, I think. In part of an answer would be I could have had Jordan be the one who died, obviously, of the two brothers. I wanted it to be the younger brother because you are way less formed at the age of 12 as to who you're going to be. You haven't even taken steps kind of in the way that the 15-year-old has to sort of flesh themselves out, or like to make choices and see whether they stick, or you know whether they are a good fit or not. You haven't kissed your first girlfriend yet. There's so many things, like nothing's happened to you yet outside of your family at the age of 12. So he feels a lot of survivor guilt in comparison that his brother like was living a life and had opinions that Edward has not yet formed. Mm-hmm. And so when he's sort of on the cusp of becoming 13, 14, 15, his whole world is ripped out from under him. So he has to find a way to like move forward into becoming a person from like a completely different starting place than he was before. And he also has to maneuver his way through this landscape of just grief and loss. So that sort of double whammy, it puts him in a place where certainly for the first year, he's in like a fugue state. He is taking one step after another and basically trying to figure out how to survive. And so it delays his sort of becoming his own person, which really is beginning to happen with the letters and him making choices in that time. So I think what you're looking at is like he's so sad and he's having to grow up and be so sad at the same time. And there's something in there that he can't gain traction. Whereas Shay can, because she was just in the throe of her own life, and Jordan was too. Does that make sense? Okay? So I think that's what I would say for that. He's also like a nice, kind, sensitive person, which can read as like vague or bland. I don't know. And then the fortune teller. well, she's Florida in her next life.
That's what I thought.
I assume that's
Oh, wow.
yeah. I mean, nobody, like, I feel like a third of the people that read the book think that or have that thought. And I think it's fine either way. Like, I think that sits in that scene, whether you're conscious of it or not, because that explains a lot of her awareness of him and her knowing, to call him Eddie. And but I think it works either way, because either she's psychic or she's psychic and she's Florida. So.
Yep, thank you. I wanted to know, I didn't want to like assume.
No, yeah, no, yes, you're correct.
That was great. I actually thought that too. I want to just speak to like the Edward, because there's a quote, I wrote it down, it's near the end of the book, and I think it kind of shows like how the realization. Let me just read the quote. So Shay and Edward are at the lake by his home, and it's near the end of the book. And the quote is, "Moonlight beams through his eyelids and he can see, as if it's the lake in front of him, the pain and loss he's been swimming in for years. In the moonlight, though, the pain is revealed to be love. The emotions are entwined. They are two sides of the same gleaming coin." So I think that speaks volumes for his progression, that paragraph. So I just thought that really highlighted.
Yeah, I think at that point in the book, he's finally reached a place where he's able to see that his pain was love. Like when I was in the final draft it was Edward that I rewrote, and it was hard for me to find like an organizing principle for myself, even of like, I didn't want it to be like he hit, recovery step number 1 and 2, because it's baby steps and then bigger leaps and then going backwards, and that's how it really is. But again, my husband, who has this smart brain that's very different, he has a different smart brain than my kind of brain, which is very helpful and sometimes annoying. He had the idea that I should look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you guys have probably seen. It's a triangle, very famous, and so it's our human needs, and the bottom, the fat part of the triangle is like a roof over your head and food and like survival, and the next step is feeling safe. I always forget them now when I do it, but like then the one after that is like connection, like social connection. And then the top of the tiny part of the triangle that not everybody reaches is like self-embodiment, where you've sort of, achieved your potential. You're using everything that's inside of you. And so for Edward, it's at the end I do think that because of this, I think when I talk about the book, sometimes I talk about the idea that this catastrophic, absolutely horrible, unthinkably horrible event happens to Edward on this scale that is hard for us to even wrap our heads around. But every single human being has terrible things that happen to them, whether, you go through a divorce, or you lose a job that had been your identity, or you, one day your biochemistry changes and you are all of a sudden soaked in sadness that you can't explain. Like we come up against these periods in our life where something happens and it seems impossible to us to see how we're going to move through it. And often this is like happening in our own head, and other people around us aren't even aware that we're going through it. But I'm interested in the idea that we can move through these kind of events and be more on the other side. The other alternative is to be broken by them, to have something terrible happen and you just start drinking and eschew everyone in your life and, die of kidney failure. That would be the sort of letting it destroy you. But the alternative is that you become more human, more compassionate, more self-aware, all of these things on the other side. And I think that Edward is reaching that place where he's not someone who's going to be able to live with like blinders on, or without being aware of like the love and the loss and the grief and the beauty in life. He's going to see it all, and that's going to be part of his life moving forward. And that's a wonderful thing. Like he's gonna live like a fully felt life.
Well, and that's where the hope and possibility were inspired. You know, it was so inspiring that it gives us hope, and we see possibility can exist even in such tragedy, or even in uncertainty. You know, like we're experiencing now. So, yeah, that was. Thank you for explaining it that way or sharing it that way. I had an idea. I thought it would be kind of fun to ask our participants a question. What do you think about that, Anne?
Sure.
Okay. So, I want to pose the question to all of you. What was a defining or the defining moment in the book? And I'm not going to say, give any more explanation than, so what really touched you the most? Was there a moment that you can recall? Because I know there was for me. And so I'm curious, was there a defining moment that will be what you take away from or most memorable for you in the book?
I can see Murillo has his hand up. So if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Sure. So it was actually I was going to ask that as a question, but I think that, what stood out to me was when Edward and Shay go back to New York, or go to New York to meet Mahira. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And, he entertains the idea, what if what if Jordan was the one that was alive, and what if, he had died, and what would happen? And I could see very clearly that, even probably Jordan would have to, go to, live with John and Lacey, that he wouldn't have lasted there. And he probably would have taken off, and he probably would have run away, and probably would have gone back to Mahir. And I just then got caught up in that moment of thinking, well, what if, Benjamin would be the one who survived? And what if, all the other ones, would have, the sole survivors, and how the story would have been completely different. So just the different perspectives. So that's something that stood out to me, that, we'll be thinking about that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Thank you, Murillo. And I think we have Kendall. Yeah, unmute yourself.
For me, it was, I hope everyone here's read the book, because I'm going to talk about like the last two sentences. But for me, it was that last little half page, because it's just, the book itself is just so heartbreaking. And I think what everyone wants at the end of it is for Edward to find some sort of a moment of peace, of solace. And just like the way that it was written, where it's like Shay, like she sort of blots out the sky as they're kissing. I was like, wow, like his future and his past are finally kind of coming together in a way. And he's inviting it. He's not fighting it anymore. And he's, also in a way he's with his family, because that's where his family died. And I'm not going to cry. I just thought it was just really like, especially during the time that we're in now, I thought it was just really like, I was really happy that he, it took a few years, but I was like, wow, like he like earned the slow. Like this is his moment where he can like, that he is making his own. And I just thought it was really like, I was like, I don't want to use the word perfect, but I'm going to use it. I was like, this is the perfect ending for a book like this, because he's so young. And yet I think we have, like, when I closed the book, I was like, I said to myself, I was like, Edward's going to be okay. That was, yeah.
Thank you. That's lovely. He is going to be okay. He has Shay.
That's true. Stephanie, please unmute yourself.
I actually have a question, if I can go back to, rather than a defining moment. And that is, did you know early on that you were going to be writing a novel about hope? I mean, hope is transcendent, throughout the novel. And there's so much hope in how characters develop and where they end up, whether it's the uncle, whether it's Edward. To me, sort of people just pull through, and on some level, there is the happiest ending you can imagine, you know, as we just spoke, as just Kendall just spoke of. Did you sort of go through a process to get there, or did you sort of know early on that you wanted hope to be a sort of central recurring theme of your novel?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know a lot. I didn't know that I was going to have to, you know, I didn't know I was going to have to explore love and grief in all the different ways that I did. I think the thing I became aware of first was that I was writing a novel about kindness, where the only way that I realized that the only way that Edward had a chance was if the people around him stepped forward with their human flawed kindness. And they do. And that actually made it a really wonderful fictional universe for me to live in. For those 8 years, that's what made it like a joyful experience to write, even though obviously it was about this terrible tragedy. I think hope was never something, I think that's so like tenuous and tricky that if I tried to write about hope, it would have been really like hokey and cheesy. It had to come through writing about the kindness and the love and the grief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So is there anyone else who wants to either ask another question or share about a moment that that they'll remember from the book or that was defining for them? No? Okay.
Gloria.
I'm sorry, Gloria?
Gloria has a hand up.
Oh, okay, I guess I missed that. Gloria, please unmute yourself.
There we go, Gloria. I'll unmute you.
Can you hear
There we
me?
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The principal gave him the fern that had gotten a virus, and it seems that most of them were dying, and he gave it to him, and he brought it down into his basement, and lo and behold, it got better and it lived. So to me, it's like choose life. And that's, I felt maybe was a defining moment.
Yeah, because Edward has to take care of someone other than himself.
Right,
right. A very kind act from the principal, among other very
right, very kind, yeah.
Right. There's another woman whose hand was like physically raised, but I don't know your, yes, you.
So just unmute yourself.
Hi, I love the book. It was wonderful. The defining moment for me, I know we've talked a lot about Shay, but it was really when he showed up in her room. I was so happy you gave him a person. You gave him somebody. I know he had his aunt and his uncle, but it was that connection. You could just, I felt it gave me hope when I knew he had that their relationship. It was really wonderful, and I enjoyed watching that progress through the rest of the book. It was really beautiful.
Thank you very much.
So anyone else? Let's take a look here. Okay, so if no one else has any more comments or questions, then I'm going to turn it back over to Ann. And if you want to just say a few parting words or share something else with us.
Well, you wanted me to read a quote. And what I thought was, there's actually 3 quotes in the book. There's 3 parts in the book, and each one has there's a name for this. I can't remember what it's supposed to be called when you have a quote preceding a section. I should know that, but I don't. And I actually like collect quotes. It's a hobby of mine. So I thought I would just read the 3 quotes, like one from the one that starts each section. So the first one is by Pema Chodron. Since death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain, what is the most important thing? I love that quote. Actually, I love all 3 of these quotes. So. the beginning of part 2 then is a quote by George Eliot. I think it's in Middlemarch. What do we live for if it is not to make life less difficult to each other? And then the final one for the third part is James Baldwin. We contain the other, hopelessly and forever. Thank you very much for having me tonight. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we loved your book and continued success. We're waiting for your next one. Hopefully it won't take you another 8 years, but if it does, we have something to look forward to.
We'll see.
And so now I'm going to actually turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. All right. Great.
So let's just take a moment to check back in. So finding yourselves a comfortable seat. And if it feels right, perhaps allowing the eyes to close or maybe softening the gaze. And just taking a few breaths. Tuning into the breath, the natural breath cycle of the body. Gently resting the awareness here for a moment. Staying with each breath, breath by breath and moment by moment. And taking a moment now to reflect back on the evening. And perhaps recalling the highlight of the evening. Maybe recalling the shiniest point of this evening and holding that in your mind's eye. And just taking a moment to savor this moment or experience. Really noticing what it feels like to savor. Tuning into this. And then letting this savoring go. And coming back to the breath once again. Taking a few more breaths here. And if the eyes have been closed, gently allowing them to flutter open. And I wanted to just say thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It was so wonderful having you here and participating in this meaningful discussion. And a special thank you to Ann for joining us. I was so thrilled, and we're so thrilled that you were able to be here and answer our questions and provide insights. It was truly wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Yes, thank you. I want to let you know we will have another book club coming up in July, on July 23rd. The book will be Transcend by Scott Barry Kaufman. And at the end of this, I'll put up a screen so that you can take down the information if you're interested. And I really hope that we see you there. And I hope to see you sometime soon at some of our other events. Be well and take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was really special.
Thank you. Be well.